When I saw the bright orange eviction notice nailed to my cabin door, I laughed, out loud. Not the kind of laugh that comes from joy, but the kind that comes from disbelief. I stood there, the morning fog rolling off the lake, coffee steaming in my hand, as I read the words again. Per Section 4B of the Lakeside Estates HOA Agreement, unauthorized occupancy must cease immediately. Unauthorized occupancy. On my land. You see, I'm Noah Bradley, a quiet, middle-aged guy who's spent most of his life tucked away in this same little cabin by the water. My father built it back in the late 70s, before the shiny million-dollar homes crept up around the shoreline like weeds. Back then, this lake was peaceful. It was a place where people fished at sunrise, kids swam until their fingers wrinkled, and no one cared about the aesthetic harmony of mailbox colors. But then came the HOA. A group of developers bought the land around the lake, paved the forest trails, and sold parcels to anyone who could afford the inflated dream of lakefront luxury. They called it Lakeside Estates. They built iron gates, manicured lawns, and a community clubhouse that looked like a museum. And in the middle of it all, like a scar they couldn't cover up, was my little wooden cabin. At first, they left me alone. I kept to myself, fixed boats, and maintained the small dock that's been there longer than their fancy houses. But the moment they formed their HOA, everything changed. Letters started appearing in my mailbox. Complaints about my unapproved structure, my non-conforming dock, and my unauthorized presence. The final straw came when she showed up. Her name was Karen Douglas, president of the Lakeside Estates HOA. Tall, sharp, and smug as a knife's edge. She showed up in her spotless white SUV, sunglasses perched high on her head, clipboard in hand. Mr. Bradley, she began, stepping out like she owned the ground she walked on. This property falls within Lakeside jurisdiction. You're not compliant with community regulations. I looked at her, half amused, half curious. I'm not part of your community, ma'am. This cabin's been here long before you folks built your playground. She smirked. Oh, we'll see about that. And she did. Over the next few months, they tried everything, mailed fines, cut my power, even blocked off the private road that led to my cabin. I had to park half a mile away and walk through the trees just to get home. But I didn't complain. Because while they thought I was just some old hermit clinging to a shack, I knew something they didn't. I owned more than this cabin. See, when my father passed away, he left me more than just his craftsmanship. He left me the deed, one that included not just the land my cabin sat on, but also the entire lake and the surrounding easements that extended right up to where the HOA's community property began. And tucked neatly within that boundary was their only parking lot and boat ramp. The same one every resident used daily. I'd never enforced it before. I was a good neighbor, quiet and respectful. But they crossed a line when they tried to take what was mine. The eviction notice was my breaking point. I called my lawyer, an old friend named Mason who'd helped my dad years ago. He chuckled when I told him what happened. They're evicting you, from your own land. Yep, I said. And I think it's time we remind them who really owns the lake. Within a week, Mason filed the paperwork. The HOA received a cease and desist order for trespassing and unlawful interference with private property. I installed a gate at the parking lot entrance and put up a sign that read, "Greater than private property, access by permission only." The next morning, chaos erupted. Homeowners gathered in confusion, honking and yelling when they couldn't launch their boats or park near the water. Karen stormed down the hill, demanding I remove the gate. "You can't do this," she barked. "This is community property." I handed her a copy of the original deed, with my name clearly printed across the entire boundary. "Actually," I said calmly, "this is my property. You've been using it for free, for years." She scanned the paper, her confidence cracking. "There must be a mistake. We maintain this area." I smiled. "You maintained my property. I appreciate it." Word spread fast. Within days, the HOA board was in full meltdown. Their residents were furious, not at me, but at them. The HOA fees had skyrocketed to fund their legal battle, and they had no access to the lake without my consent. Then came the meeting. They invited me to discuss terms. I walked into their marble-floored clubhouse wearing muddy boots and a flannel shirt. Karen sat at the head of the table, lips tight, eyes burning. "Mr. Bradley," she started, "perhaps we can come to an agreement. If you'd be willing to." "Actually," I interrupted, "I've already come up with one." I slid a paper across the table. My proposal was simple. They would acknowledge my property boundaries. They would drop all claims and actions against me. And in exchange, I'd grant limited access to the parking lot and boat ramp, for a small leasing fee, payable to the Bradley Family Trust. Karen's face went pale. You're charging us? I leaned back. Think of it as dues, for using my land. The vote was unanimous. They had no choice. Within months, the tension faded. They paid the fee annually, and the lake remained peaceful once more. I even fixed up the old dock, letting neighborhood kids fish there in the evenings, just like the old days. But Karen, she resigned not long after. Couldn't stand the humiliation, I suppose. Now, every morning I sit on my porch, watching the sunlight ripple across my lake, and I smile. Because some people think power comes from money or authority. But real power, the kind that lasts, comes from knowing who you are, standing your ground, and never letting anyone take what's yours. The HOA tried to evict me from my cabin. But in the end, they learned a simple truth. You can't evict the man who owns the lake you swim in, and the parking lot you drive on to get there.